Today I'm going to show you the best hiking boots that you've probably never heard of. I've spent years in the backcountry doing many different types of trails, from when I spent time in the military as a Royal Marines Commando to now going hiking with my family and my friends. I'm going to show you why this is the best boot for comfort, best boot for style, and best boot so that you can have the most fun on the trail pain-free. My name is Darren from Defy Adventures, and this is the review of the Vivobarefoot Escape Forest. So the reason you don't know anything about this boot, or you've probably never seen it before, is that you're not going to see these in your typical hiking shop. So you're not going to see them in Mech, you're not going to see them in altitude sports, and you're not going to see them in the high street. The barefoot movement in general is something that I got involved in back in 2019. So we're looking for a few things when we're looking for a barefoot shoe. One, they have to be super flexible. Two, we have to have no drop from the rear to the front. And then three, we want to have a nice wide toe box, which allows your feet to spread. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the whole barefoot movement itself, but for me, changing from a regular shoe to a barefoot shoe about 5 years ago has done phenomenal things for my foot health, my lower back health, and my calves, and pretty much everything all the way up from ankles to knees in general. The reason that I really wanted to try this boot was after using some sneakers for a while in the barefoot, I saw these, and even though this boot has been heavily used and it's pretty rugged right now, I really like the aesthetic of these when seeing them online, and I thought I just needed to give it a try. Something that happened to me a lot when I was in the military and when I do hiking is I roll my ankles. So I was a little worried about something like this that's got so much flexibility and so little stiffness, was how that was going to transfer to overall hiking. But it's been phenomenal. And I'll kind of go into why that is a little bit later. I'm so in love with these boots, I actually went and bought a second pair, which you can see are on my feet now. And that's because I was worried that they may change this or they may stop and not have these in stock. So that's just how into the boots I am. So as I said, the first thing that attracted me was the aesthetic. The second part of it was the fact that there are a barefoot boot. And the third was that they have a really good grip. And because I like to get off-road into the trails, especially when it's wet, I wanted to make sure that I had some grip to allow me to do that. One of the things that I noticed first when I was wearing these is that I never got any blisters. And that was something that I also suffered with quite a lot in the military. And I think the reason for that is because the boots are relatively wide at the front, which is the idea of a barefoot boot. My feet were able to move and feel the ground, and they weren't restricted like they were in some of my other boots. Now, previous to this, my favorite pair of boots were the Salomon Quest 3Ds, but I found that at the front and the toe box was really narrow, and my feet would rub against each other after many hours on the trail, and I would end up blisters in between the toes and sort of on the outside of the big toe and the little toe. That was completely eliminated when I started wearing these boots. And because they're a leather material, they're nice and soft, which means the heel is also quite free to move around, and you have that flexibility in the ankle that I mentioned. One thing these are is they are not waterproof, which some people like out of a boot, but they are water resistant, and you do get Renapur leather balm that you can put on these boots, and that does make them waterproof, and you can hike to your heart's content and you're not going to get your feet wet, which is great. The thing that's a little bit hard to explain is how is it that such a flexible boot is better than a really stiff boot for protecting your ankles? Well, the best explanation I have is that with a regular boot, there's a point where you have this thick, hard sole. And the thick, hard sole has a tipping point where if your foot is on the floor and you turn your boot, because that sole is quite thick, there's a point where your ankle is going to go and you can't really recover from that. So then you have your foot in the top of the boot, and the boot and your leg is kind of, trying to keep itself upright. So because these don't have an edge of the sole, because they're a nice thin sole, if you do go over to the side slightly, then you can recover from that quite easily. And like I said, I spent a lot of time dealing with ankle problems with a traditional boot. And with these, I've never had that problem. Hiking with a messed up ankle is not fun. And because I like to do nice big loop trails that are in the middle of nowhere, if you do roll your ankles or whatever, you got to get yourself out of that situation. So that's been a key point for me. So the one thing that I also really love about the boot is the fact that it's highly durable. This boot has about 800 kilometers on it, and I know that because I'm a geek and I track that stuff on Strava. It's still gonna be used for multiple more hikes. The sole is actually a Michelin sole, so the Michelin tires, and it's still got as much tread on it as it had when it first started, and the leather is super durable, and I do take care of it. All right, these do get treated with the Renopur balm after every single hike. Highly durable, which is what you want out of a pair of boots, because you know, most of the boots are not that cheap, right? In terms of comfort, I've already touched on a little bit. The fact that they're a nice wide fit in the toe box just gives your feet a lot of room to breathe, which I found that both in hot climates and cold climates, that's actually beneficial. So I hiked in these this winter when it was snow on the ground, and because your feet aren't crushed together, and anybody who skis has this as an understanding. If you're wearing big, thick ski boots, most people have a problem with their feet getting cold. That's because their toes are not able to move. So when you have a wider toe box, as you're moving, your foot is actually active because it's in contact with the ground. The muscles in the feet are actually being used, so your feet actually stay warm. Conversely, in a hotter climate, you can wear a lighter sock and your feet have that room where they're not tight together and they have a bit of extra room to breathe as well. So I've actually found in both climates they're good. I like wearing them in the summer and the winter. Obviously in the winter you might want to add some kind of ice traction or something like that if it gets a little rough. Because the barefoot boot itself is actually a minimalist boot, these come in nice and light. So they're about 500 grams per boot. So for a kilogram, you've got both boots on your feet, which is great, right? I'm definitely not the kind of hiker that tries to cut weight, but if we can cut weight and still get performance, I'm very happy with that. A little story is, one thing that I hate when I go hiking is I hate my feet getting wet. And on a trip that I did last year, we were doing the La Cloche Silhouette Trail up in Killarney. I fell off a beaver dam about 10 minutes into the hike. Both boots completely saturated, and that pretty much stayed the whole way for the 4 days on the trail because it was raining, it was wet, and the conditions just didn't allow to get these boots dried quickly. However, the reason I usually don't like having my feet wet is because that's where they blister. But I still find these boots performed really, really well. The water drained out of them really quickly. The leather does not hold on to the water. And even though, you know, the river went over the top and I did have a full pair of boots, they were still comfortable, they still performed, and I was still able to have a good trip even though my feet were wet. Then the final little thing I wanted to bring on here and touch on, and this is a bit of a problem that people talk about when looking at minimalist barefoot footwear, in that it's a little bit expensive. And there are a few reasons for that you can go deeper into, and one of them is just from a manufacturing cost process. A lot of the major brands who are doing the typical shoe sizing, they reuse what's called the shoe lasts. They can't do that with the Vivobarefoot or the barefoot shoe in general because they have to create these new lasts for actual foot-shaped shoes, all right, which is what we are here. So these come in just over $400, which is comparable to a lot of hiking boots, but you can also probably obviously spend a lot less. But for 800 kilometers, I think I've got another few years out of these, no problem. For me, every single dollar is worth it. So who would I recommend use this boot? Well, really easy, simple case is I would recommend it to almost everybody. But there are a few situations that may not be the best. If you're doing some extreme alpine type climbing or mountaineering, then you may want something that is a thicker sole and also a bit more of rigidity, so you could, you know, add some crampons or something like that. But for your everyday hiking, I use these for walking the dog. I use these for my backcountry trips. I don't always use them in winter because I don't want the salt to destroy the leather. But pretty much most use cases that you're on your feet and you're hiking, walking, moving, these boots are going to be nice and comfortable. They're not going to be too hot. Your feet can still be quite warm in the winter, and you'll get an enjoyable experience out of them. So thanks for listening to this review. I hope this has opened up a new chapter for you and a new insight into your next pair of boots. My name's Darren from Defy Adventures, and if you like this video and you want to get more tips on some unique pieces of equipment, give us a follow and like this video so we can see that people are enjoying the content.